Hi, I'm Tyler, and this is the Fox Valley Film Critics. In this episode, we're going to be discussing the next in the lineup of the AFI's Top 100 American Movies, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, as well as the newest Eli Roth action movie, Death Wish. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome to the show, brought to you by Groupthink Productions and FVTV. Joining us once again today is Groupthink Productions editor Terry.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you on again for, I don't know how many times now, but...
I think it's been 3.
I think it's been more than that. But
Has it?
I don't know.
Yeah. I'm older. All my days just tend to blend together. All I know is that they all end in Y. So.
Well, yeah, optimism is usually good at this age.
Absolutely.
My elderly... I'm 23 years old. I'm old. But yeah, so first things first, we're going to go through Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, which, oh boy, I love going through Frank Capra movies. He's like my favorite director, so.
I wouldn't say he's one of my favorite. I wouldn't say he's definitely up there. He's especially anytime he's paired with Jimmy Stewart. I think those two had a chemistry that's been unmatched in a lot of things. Any movie that James Stewart and Frank Capra did together was like pretty much a classic.
I mean, Stewart's did a lot. He did a lot of John Ford films. He did a lot of I can't remember all the people he was with.
I know, and it's funny because when I grew up, Stewart was still alive, but he was an older actor and everything, and he was still in things. But the only references that I got of James Stewart were like the comedians I grew up with, like Dana Carvey. He always did impressions of James Stewart, where it's just like, oh wow, like doing the James Stewart talk, and then. And getting the love of movies and going through a lot of movies, especially ones where you see James Stewart, you just realize just what a tremendous actor he was. I mean, the depth that he could do and the characters that he could play in movies. I mean, he was great. And in this movie, he was great too.
I talked about it when I did an essay for Geeks Under Grace in December about It's a Wonderful Life, and I kind of talk about how he had served in World War II, and that there's a kind of clear difference between the films he did before the war and the films he did after war. Before the war, it was all Philadelphia Story, and it's very warm and cuddly, and it has this like kind of goofball comedy feel to it. After the war, it goes way into the like drama and stuff like that. So like Man Who Shot Liberty Valance and It's a Wonderful Life and stuff like that, where you can tell those characters always have a burden to them.
Yeah, and I think going off of that theme too, I think Flight of the Phoenix was part of that because he was actually a pilot in World
War II. He led a bomber squadron.
Yeah, okay. So I thought so. But we digress. Filibuster! We're going back to the movie.
This is before he got horribly scarred by being a bomber pilot over Germany.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this was young Jimmy Stewart. He's optimistic, and this is kind of the fun part of the movie because this is basically the best film you could have for him going off to war. It's Jimmy Stewart, young optimist, going out to realize the world sucks.
Yes. Yeah, and it's funny too because we can. One of the things that I noticed in watching this movie is it still stands today, especially with what's going on in our own government and everything like that. And
this movie is so quaint about it, though.
Yeah.
Like if you look in the history of it a little bit, this was considered a controversial film because like people are daring to question institutions.
Right.
The government could be bad.
Right. Benevolent Uncle Sam is not going to like this.
For shame.
Yeah. But to give a synopsis of the movie, James Stewart, he plays Jefferson Smith. And I know, like, IMDb described him as naive, and I guess there is a bit of naivete with him, but I think it's more so, I think the better way to describe his character, Jefferson Smith, he's just a generally good person.
He's like a young Atticus Finch, essentially.
Yes.
He doesn't have the life experience that lets you, like, actually be able to take a stand yet, but he's got that, like, I'm going to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, he's untainted, I guess, is the word. Like, he's lived in his little bubble. I can't remember where it was he was from. He was
like Missouri.
Something like headmaster of the Eagle Scouts or the Boy Scouts, and like beloved in his own little community. But then he gets chosen to take this empty, vacant senator seat in Washington because of his character. They think he's going to be a big pushover. and that they can, they have this secret bill that they want to pass, which again, like I said, it kind of stands up to today's times too. It's like, the shady government with their secret bills that they need to push through, and we need yes men, and that's what they thought he was going to be. And he ends up going to Washington, and he's, like you said, idealistic. He's got all these great things that he's going to do, and then he realizes just how the system works, and it almost breaks him.
Yeah, he comes very close to breaking him.
Yeah, it like almost ruins his spirit. But his love interest and friend Jean Arthur, who is plays a Washington, I think she was a Washington Post reporter, who her first assignments were basically lambasting him for his naivete and his general goodness and how he didn't belong in Washington and this, and then as she gets to know him and realizes just how genuinely good he is, and he's nothing like all the other senators that are, for lack of a better term, are kind of scummy.
Well, they are.
Yeah, like she recognizes, she starts to realize the symbol of the light that he is and the darkness that it was like the politics at that time.
He's basically functioning as a reverse virus, and just like he's undoing all of the corruption that's happening in Washington just by being able to hold up being a good person where there aren't good people.
And it's not, because the thing that I like about Jean Arthur too is her character. She doesn't just play the love interest. I mean, that's there. It's a 1939 movie. A Frank Capra film, of course, is going to be a love interest. But she also takes on the role of mentor, because she's the one who transforms Mr. Smith into the filibustering senator that he is. She teaches him the ways and the laws of the Senate House and everything, and he uses them to his advantage to get what he wants. And it's actually, like I said, it's a really good movie. It's like I guess to use a cliche, the rags to riches, the coming of age story of all coming of age stories.
It's kind of a good brush up on how Washington works, kind of.
Yeah.
I remember when I was in high school. Actually, I was in high school. We watched this in one of my history classes, is when you were going over how the government works, and it's just like, okay, this is how a filibuster works. This is how you write a law. This is how you do all this stuff, and it's one of those movies you show to kids. It reminds me of that one scene from Edge of 17 where the teacher leaves the room and he leaves young Mr. Lincoln on the background. It's like, okay, you're gonna watch a movie that's educational. It just goes away.
And it's funny too. Speaking of the filibuster scene, I mean, anybody that loves movies knows that scene, has heard it. And I mean, this movie is closer to 100 years old than it is 50.
80s.
Yeah, somewhere up there, the 80s, 90 years old. And the fact that filibuster scene is still talked about and people that go through movies still recognize it, it just shows how powerful this movie was back then when it came out, and how much of a cult phenomenon it's become since.
It's not even a cult phenomenon, because this is
I guess a social phenomenon.
Yeah, I know young people that don't like black and white movies that watch this movie and have fond memories of it just because they're like, oh, I watched that in high school. It's really good.
And the character of Jefferson Smith, he still can relate to the everyman in today's society. The scrappy young go-getter who's going to right the wrongs. And
maybe I'm surrounded by too many cynical nerds. So I don't know a lot of people that are that.
Maybe that's more the next my generation. But I say, yeah.
I mean, I actually know Eagle Scouts, and none of them, and they're kind of not like that.
Not like that, yeah. But I mean, but I guess the better way to say it is, there's a lot of people that were like, if I was in there, I would do this and I would do that and I would have all these great things. And that's kind of what Jefferson Smith is. He was basically the little man that fought for the little man, as opposed to, and he stayed that too, as opposed to now you have the people that go into politics who start out as the little man who are going to fight for the little man, and then they meet the big man, and it's like, yeah, I'm going to go play for this team now. And it's like, what about the little man? He never switched teams. He presented that, I'm thinking of the word, but he never changed his standards. He never lowered them or nothing. He was just always Jefferson Smith.
There's a really good story I was told about this. I've been trying to find a good retelling of it ever since I heard of it, but I found some anecdotal proof that it actually did happen. There was, right before the movie came out in 1939, and it was released in Europe within a year or two after that, when the war in Europe was starting. And in the final months before France got conquered by the Germans, the Germans said, you can run whatever American movies you have in your stock, but by the end of the month, you need to clear out, or you're not going to be allowed to run those movies anymore. And one theater, in the month that it had before it closed, decided that it was going to run Mr. Smith Goes to Washington on a loop, because they considered that film about how difficult it is to fighting corruption just was at that particular moment of time, and they just did it to the end. And I haven't been able to find like the actual like information on that story, but I think that it goes to show just like what kind of film this is. Like it's like even though it was controversial, even though it was, even though it still holds up today, but it definitely kind of cuts to the core of that something important about the importance of like being able to fix a system and being able to fix something that's broken.
Yeah, and like, have stand your ground and everything. That's interesting you said, because it's weird. It's like a French using an American film almost as propaganda. I mean, if you think about it, to play that repeatedly on loop, and I mean, and the message behind that is, like you said, he's going up against basically an insurmountable force. He's going up against the political machine of Washington, and he's a lone noob, to use a new term, use a new language, but yeah, he's
to use the new speak.
Yeah, he's like doesn't know anything about it. He's basically like a baby going into a world full of guys that have been there forever and everything. But he never stands his ground, doesn't lose his focus, and gets it done. I mean, I think that's actually what you said with the French playing it back. That's actually a really interesting story.
It is, yeah.
I'd like to research that too, yeah.
Yeah, if we can find it, that'd be great. That's all the time we have for this segment. Join us for the next segment where we'll be discussing Death Wish. Stay tuned.
Does this help at all?
Anything helps, ma'am. Just try to get some sleep now.
I can't sleep.
Yeah, me neither. I'm on my way.
Hello, welcome back. So, Death Wish. Here's an interesting quandary I've been trying to deal with the show lately. I've been trying to figure out ways we can kind of connect the episodes to the AFI movies.
Okay.
Because if you haven't noticed, the ones that tend to pick tend to be incredibly disparate. There's really no like syncopation between like the old movie and the new one. So whenever they happen to line up in any sort of way, I'm always a little bit happy. I was very tempted to call this Justice Week because it's like
I think that fits.
Because like you have the old-fashioned, classy, we have to fix the system, and now we have like schlocky, I'm gonna bring justice to the streets kind of thing. This is like
I definitely think that fits. That's actually a really good. That's actually a good theme, and you wouldn't be wrong in that, because I was thinking the same thing. You know, it's like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and Death Wish, and it's like the theme could be what one man will do when he's pushed far enough, and
it's like two sides of a really hilarious coin.
and that's funny too. It's like Mr. Smith meeting. They should have Mr. Smith meets Paul Kersey in the two.
That would have been so messed up.
Oh right, yeah. One's like, no, you got to do it by speech. Yeah, you
I
do
think
it
that's
with
called
a gun, right?
I think that's called The Shootist with John Wayne.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it could have been, right. But no, like we were talking a little bit before the show, and so the two things that I'm going to say I was happy about with this movie is one, it was Bruce Willis back in an action role, which it's kind of been. I think it's been a little bit.
Die Hard 5, maybe.
Yeah,
maybe.
Or
he might have done like
Red and Red 2.
Yeah, maybe he did. I don't know if he did Sin City 2. I mean, I don't know. But
I think he was a little bit in Sin City 2, but yeah, seeing him kind of take on that lead main character action role, and then it was also nice to see Eli Roth behind the directing chair.
It's been a couple of years.
Yeah, it has. But what I saw the original Death Wish probably in my 20s, and God, that was a really good movie. I know it's like a cult classic, but I think Bronson, he portrayed that. I think he did a better job of portraying the main character of Paul Kersey, just a man that like was pushed too far and just felt like the festering disease that was the violence of the city that he lived in, and decided he was going to do something. Whereas like in this, it's like Bruce Willis, he does kind of a good job of that, but he goes from like being a mild-mannered doctor to special forces vigilante guy that's able to do all this stuff that it's like, you have no training except to be a doctor. How are you doing these things?
Okay, here's the difference. Charles Bronson couldn't act, and Bruce Willis is choosing not to.
that might be a good point. But even Even the original Death Wish, what I liked about it though too was it escalated just like I mean, the original act of violence in the original Death Wish with Bronson was like violence to the extreme, but he wasn't a violent man. He became a violent man.
He was a pacifistic liberal architect.
And in the original Death Wish, it escalated because the first time he goes out, he grabs a sock full of quarters, and he's not going out there to do. He first goes out to defend himself, whereas Bruce Willis is like
he goes out and actively tries to
it's
shoot
like
at someone.
he just graduates to a gun. And I get like what Eli Roth was doing, because there's the part where, no spoil, but he goes into the gun store and he's making a joke on how easy it is to get a gun in today's society. But even that, I think I think it was misplaced. Like I think it made it a little too. Tried to.
It's not clear what the story is trying to say.
Yeah, like is this kind of like a happy-go-lucky violent story, or like whereas like the original Death Wish was just dark.
Then he just finds a gun on the floor of the hospital.
Yeah, like nobody saw that or heard that. like
this happens all the time in Chicago hospitals.
Yeah, and it's like, and just all these things that like, and it's like, in the characters of the police, the two detectives that are kind of on his trail, it's like, they didn't know if they wanted to make him bumbling or smart. So they were like kind of stuck in this limbo between both.
I'd say they're incompetent.
Yeah.
Or that they're in over their head. There isn't a clear line as to what they're supposed to be. Just that they can't fix the problem.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of like meandering in the movie where the movie is not quite clear about what it's exactly saying.
Yeah.
And I should say I like Eli Roth.
And so do I.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's one of my favorites. I mean, he brought back the gore in horror.
So I thought he was going to be perfect for this film, because it's like you think Death Wish, you think brutal, unrelenting, politically incorrect, like just violent movie. And Eli Roth he's famous for torture porn. He's famous for being unreasonably brutal, and he doesn't really approach his films for the specific set of tone. So he'll make a scene insanely violent for just the sake of being insanely violent. And I felt like this was toned down for some reason.
Yeah, and I think it was like, I don't want to say it was more his, because I don't know, I don't know Eli Roth and his so I'm thinking, but it seemed like he tried to incorporate the story more, and it just fell kind of flat.
I'm wondering how much of that was his choice or the studio. Because obviously this was a studio-backed movie. You could see it with the music selection. You could see it with the cast, with like the amount of locations in downtown Chicago they were able to afford, which I thought was a little bizarre. Just like you can just rent out huge segments of Chicago that cost nothing, and it's like, why are you shooting so much of the Loop?
Yeah.
Why are you have Mad Cow here? But there's like so much here that you probably could have cut back on and just like shot it in a back alley, but you can tell they had money behind it.
Yeah.
So.
And it's like, and like we were talking about earlier, and this just popped into my head, because there's definitely subtle like comments on critiques on today's society, and I think it just didn't fit in this film. Yeah, like when he's watching himself on when Bruce Willis is watching himself on the viral video and he starts chuckling and laughing. I mean, that's a take on today's society where it's like you don't do anything unless you post it on the internet and get a bunch of likes, And he's getting this like, oh, everybody's talking about me. Where they didn't they tried to do that whole social media thing in this, and I don't think it fit, because in this, and like we talked about earlier, when Charles Bronson goes out and does what he does in the original Death Wish, he's, like you said, you can tell that he's remorseful, not so much remorseful but guilty, but it's basically like he's already in it, and there's no going back. Like, he's in it, he's looking for the people that wronged him, and he's already in too deep, but it's like, he was pushed into that. And with Bruce Willis, it was like, yes, he was pushed into it, but then it's like, oh, people know who I am, people like me. I'm no longer Paul Kersey, like, brilliant trauma surgeon. I'm now Paul Kersey, the Grim Reaper of Chicago. This is great, this is who I am now. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait a minute, no, you know what, I'm not that anymore. Everything's fine, we got him, we're good, all right, cool. I'm back to being Paul Kersey, just normal dad and doctor. I think that it was lacking a little bit of depth, because for what he did, from what pushed him to go there and what he did when he was pushed to go there, it just seems like he went in and out of it too easily.
Yeah, the script doesn't really earn it. But, I mean, I will say, I like the movie a lot. I would say this definitely ranks, like, among the later Death Wish sequels.
Sure.
And I I unabashedly like all of them, even though they're all really tasteless and really violent. But
Yeah.
I don't know. Like I would willing to put this at least on par with maybe the fourth one, in terms of like that kind of like. There's no tone control. There's no like earning in the plot events of the story, but you get to see a guy's head get bashed in with the rear end of a car.
Yeah.
You get to see a guy get the nerve in his leg cut open and watch battery acid get poured into it. It's
So I mean, it's great scenes. Just, but yeah, it's definitely one. It's like I said, it's like you were saying, it's definitely an enjoyable movie. Like it wasn't like I was sitting in the theater just like, oh my god.
This is like this is what a canon movie would look like if it came out today.
Yes. Yeah, and it's. It's one of those you just go, and if you want to see a bunch of it's basically like the one of the memes said in the movie, like this is what you think when GTA 5 is real life, and it's kind of what it is.
I will say I didn't like the memes mostly because if they were actually real, they would have been way darker.
True. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing that I was like. That brings it back to what I was saying earlier. This film should have been darker than what it was. I think it was just too.
Do you think it would have been passable at that point? Because they might have gotten they could have gone like full NC-17 and just gone for the controversy of it. But
yeah, and it may not have done as well, or may not have been like as not as well, but may not have been able to be shown at as many theaters. I don't know. Like everyone's kind of going on that whole like. It's weird. Everything kind of goes in circles, and it's like we're kind of back to where like we can't just have this violence for the sake of violence.
You can't. And not that you should want to, but you can't have the scene at the beginning of the first two Death Wish movies where someone gets brutally raped.
Yeah, not in today's
not in this
yeah.
one. It barely passes with the whole gun control debate going on right now. And every single review I've seen is just like, we have to talk about gun control. It's like, no.
Yeah.
This is a movie.
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what they toned on, and I do kind of I like and get the fact that it was set in Chicago because they touched on a lot of
topical.
They touched on a lot of the gun violence and they shed light on a lot of the things that's going on in Chicago today right now.
It reflects the state of the original film because the original Death Wish came out in the 70s, and that was kind of the era of like political chaos. And the institutions are breaking down, and everything was in like there are domestic terrorist groups all over the place, and all the societal boundaries are breaking down, and no one knew what was going on. And it's clear that Death Wish comes from a moment where, if you were living in New York City, you felt at risk just going outside, and it's cathartic watching someone take the law into his own hands, even if it's wrong. It's got that Western quality to it. Where even in the first movie, the original movie, he goes to an old West town where a guy dressed in a cowboy suit literally gives him a gun and says, is like, this is for you, and he's like being symbolically turned into a cowboy. It's like, but I like that they integrated the modern stuff into this. So it definitely has at least some place in the conversation now, if nothing else.
Sure.
That's all the time we have for this segment. Join us for the final segment where we'll be getting Terry's movie recommendation for the week. Stay tuned.
Good coffee, huh? Oh my God! What are you doing in my apartment?
Hello, and welcome back to the final segment. We're now handing things over to Terry for this week's movie recommendation.
Thank you. So for this week, I'm going to recommend, and it actually is more than fitting with what you said about Justice Week. I'm going to recommend Sam Peckinpah's 1971 film Straw Dogs with Dustin Hoffman and Susan George. And yeah, what it ties in, and I realized too, like how you wanted to tie in, it does tie in a lot with Mr. Smith, because in Straw Dogs, Dustin Hoffman marries an English woman, Susan George, and he moves back to her small Cornish village in England, and he's an American. So he has no idea of the customs in England, he has no idea, basically he doesn't even know anything about England, he just moved there because he's married to his wife, he's a mathematician, and I think they met at the university. And the town where his wife lives and had lived was kind of run by, and it's not like run in a political term, it's basically like there's like a group of guys who are kind of like the muscle of the town, like they're the quote unquote like people that run the town basically, because they're the big and bad ones and stuff. And used to be his wife's. One of the members, Charlie, used to be the wife's boyfriend from a time, and you know, he's like the stereotypical jock guy, big and strong, and you know, once now that, you know, probably tossed the wife to the side, but now that she's married to Dustin Hoffman, he wants her back and everything. But so I'm kind of digressing a little bit, but the whole synopsis of the movie, like where it ties in with Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and Death Wishes, it's that also another thing of justice where one guy gets pushed too far, and he has to take the law into his own hands. And the way that happens is like things, they escalate throughout the movie because the guys that run the town and like were like the main characters, Dustin Hoffman and his wife hire them to work on his house, and things start happening in the house, and like there's a couple other things that push them even further. But one of the things that people were talking about when this movie first came out was that Sam Peckinpah he just glorified violence. And Sam Peckinpah was like, no, this movie doesn't glorify violence. It's basically giving you an idea on what happens when you don't stop it or counteract it. Because Dustin Hoffman is a pacifist, and in being a pacifist, when all these these small violent things start happening to him and Amy from these guys and in the town, and he realizes like just how festering the town is, he doesn't do anything about it. He just lets it progress until it builds up to where he has to take action. And the last scenes of it, the movie, are great. It's just like Death Wish and like a lot of the other, like Last House on the Left. It's like his home is being invaded by these guys because something happens and they're trying to get in and he, basically the mild-mannered mathematician who's a pacifist, flips that switch to that animal switch to where he becomes the violent one. He defends what's his and he takes it by any means necessary. It's actually a really, like I said, it's a great movie. There's a lot of character development, a lot of things. It's a good movie to watch, but the ending of it, even though it's ultra violent, it's also ultra violent for a purpose. It makes you ask, like, God, what would you do if you were pushed that far?
My thing I've been told about the film is that it's very like nihilistic and like bleak. So that's all I really knew about it, other than the fact that it's like famous for that really violent ending.
Mm-hmm. Well, like we were talking about before, you know, violent in '71 is a little bit different than violent in 2018.
It's a wee bit lighter.
Yeah, it's probably a little bit more tame. Like, you know, you show it to people nowadays and they'll probably be like, why was this movie so controversial when it came out? You know, it's like, well, you got to realize when it came out, it was like, this was big time, this was like mega violence, and it wasn't fantasy violence either. It was like,
yeah,
it was like realistic, like this is what's going to happen if you do these things to people.
That's all the time we have for this episode of the Fox Valley Film Critics. You can follow me on Twitter at AnySocialCritI. That's critic without the C at the end. You can find more of my writings at the AnySocialCritic.tumblr.com and Geeks Under Grace. And you can find past recordings of this show on the Groupthink Productions YouTube page. I'm Tyler with the Fox Valley Film Critics. Have a wonderful day.